Welcome back to the Pastors Podcast. Pastor Scott here with Pastors Matt and Brian.
Hello.
Merry Christmas.
This Christmas week.
Woo!
Brian, you're the church history, the church calendar guy. Are we allowed to call this Christmas week? Or is that technically the week after Christmas?
This is
Technically,
Advent.
it's the week after Christmas, but this might be released
The
in
last
Christmas?
week of Advent? Is that what
Last
we are
week
in?
of Advent is what we were in right now, yeah.
Okay. But
yeah, celebrating Christmas right now is like, celebrating Christmas in 300 BC. It's like a little early. Right, Brian?
Yeah, and if anyone says it to me,
Right,
I'll
Brian? Right,
I'll
Brian?
get very angry if someone tries.
so in this...
It's not Christmas yet.
Right, Brian?
Fighting the good fight.
Got it.
That's a deep cut.
That was a deep cut. So we are here to sing you some holiday songs.
Yes.
That's what we're. I was just waiting.
He teed you right up,
I
Matt. You
did.
did
I
nothing.
tried.
I was going to say the ones about babies. I didn't want to
No. Don't
ruin
spoil
it.
my joke. my one joke for
By
my
the time
sermon
people are
on
listening to
Sunday.
it, they're going to hear it.
All
They've
right.
already heard it.
All right, fair
If
enough.
you're listening to this the week after Christmas,
That's right.
yeah.
So
It's okay. A joke is, just so you know, this Sunday, Christmas Eve, an awesome joke is coming. Prepare yourself.
Been working on it. Been polishing it for
12 months.
for weeks. So a couple weeks ago, I spent some time just picking Pastor Jose's brain on his Christmas traditions, his Advent traditions, what both personally and culturally. And I think what's really interesting about this time of year is that it kind of becomes a conglomeration of a whole host of different traditions in our lives, depending on our backgrounds, depending on our families, depending on how either religious or non-religious our backgrounds or even broader cultures are. And so I think it's a helpful opportunity to do less just specific teaching, because I don't know that there's a list of things that we would tell people, this is what you should do. This is what Advent, must be. And I think oftentimes we feel a lot of pressure about that, trying to make it what it's supposed to be. But instead, I think it's helpful just to look at what it is, to look at some of the things that we've found helpful and meaningful over the years, and just be able to sharpen one another and to continue to shape our individual families and our church family through those different traditions that we find particularly meaningful. And so let me start. I'd love to ask how each of you grew up celebrating Christmas. Like, what was Christmas like for you growing up?
For me, it was always, as a kid, it was always for church-related things that was mostly geared around Christmas Eve. Mm-hmm. So Christmas Eve service was when we would go to church on Christmas Eve, and that was like the biggest part of Christmas. It was in my family, when my aunt and uncle lived nearby for a long time, we would come home on Christmas Eve, and Santa had come, and so we would open presents Christmas Eve. So I would imagine in my 8-year-old head that the Christmas church service was less about the church service and worshiping Jesus, and more about looking forward to what presents were there. And when my uncle and aunt moved away, Santa would never come during the Christmas Eve church service. We would have to come home, and then my dad and the kids would go looking for Santa in the car, and my mom would always have an excuse for not going. And then Santa would have come. We just missed him every time. So that was like
that was
interesting. Like the extent of it, and plus like parties and stuff like that. But
yeah.
And then my dad always wanted to get the biggest Christmas tree. We would go to the Christmas tree lot, and he'd be like, "Where's the biggest? I want the biggest tree. What's the biggest tree you got?" And we'd come home with like a 14-foot, 15-foot Christmas tree running into the ceiling. So it was great. Yeah, that was basically the extent of most of my
memories and traditions.
Yeah, there was traditions.
Wow.
Yeah.
I don't remember a ton of traditions. I didn't know what Advent was besides a calendar with chocolate in it, for until I was in my 30s probably. But we did that. I feel like pretty regularly was like the countdown to Christmas. So you'd open the little cardboard windows and get your chocolate out.
Always very mediocre chocolate.
It tastes like plastic.
Yeah.
As an adult, I know that. As a kid, I think I was very excited. And my mom still sends those every year to my kids. So they still do that. So that was something, I mean, there definitely was, we hang up decorations, there's trees, there's lights. It didn't have a profoundly like religious quality to it, like the lights or the trees or things like that. It was very just Christmas oriented. And the actual holiday, like Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, most of my memories are related to not church things because whether we would have gone or not, like the having my parents are divorced. And so things would expand to fill kind of everything. So Christmas morning was with my mom. Christmas afternoon and evening was with my dad. So Christmas Eve was usually with like some of my mom's family. So we have a lot of cousins. So there's like a lot of moving parts. It was great. I have a lot of very warm memories of it, but my memories are entirely going to different people's houses or having them come to my house and then going to a different house, having the same thing or different. So very fond memories, but that was like the holiday. It's my favorite holiday. It was when I was a kid, but it was entirely about different family and how that configuration was going to happen and who we were going to see when.
I would imagine for a lot of kids of divorced parents, that's pretty significant. Even now, as someone who's married to someone who grew up in a family that had divorced parents, the complexities of that are still very relevant to this day. So,
and I think actually probably more the norm than the alternative.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, and a lot of people I know, those were difficult. I mean, for me, I'm really grateful that it wasn't a very difficult. I don't have any bad memories of like, oh, now we got to go here and see these people. Yeah. I have really good memories of all of that, but it definitely was the predominant tradition was just kind of all the different factors that would happen to figure out who you were going to see when and where.
My dad's dad, growing up, I saw him once a year on Christmas Day. He would come to our house for an hour, give me a crisp $20 bill, and would take a picture of us. That's the only time I ever saw him, once a year.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
That's my Christmas tradition.
Man.
Grandpa's taking a picture of you.
It's like an Old West memory or something.
It was like
so old.
It was so. My dad's family's a mess, but it was.
Okay, so this is really interesting. Okay, so because for the vast majority of my childhood, like Christmas Day, when I was little, we would drive the hour to my grandparents. We were living in Colorado, but then when I was 10, we moved to California. So then Christmas was about flying back to Colorado. And every Christmas for my like 0 to 20 was at my mom's parents' house. Right. And it was like, this was like the patriarch and the matriarch of the family. Grandma and Grandpa Harper's house was like all Christmas memories were filtered through there. And we would go to Christmas Eve service, but we'd have to dress up. Like I had to have a tie and a suit jacket to go to Christmas Eve service.
So you flew with like nice clothes.
Oh yeah. Like
even when you were like 20, like 19, like when you were in college with bleach tips and puka shell necklaces?
I at least had to wear a tie for sure. I mean, but I didn't only have to wear a tie for Christmas Eve service. We had to wear a tie for Christmas dinner. Like, so we would do Christmas presents in our pajamas and stuff like that. But even though we're all staying in the same house, like I would have to put a tie on for Christmas dinner. And then all the cousins would come over. Like it was
Was the tie thing cool? Like later on, looking back, was it like you had a tradition? You had something that mattered?
Looking back, I miss it. I'll be honest with you. Like I hated it as a teenager.
Yeah, right.
Like it was lame as a teenager. Looking back, there's a piece of me that totally like that actually kind of misses it, and that misses, just the casualness that. Anyway, that's completely
it was something formal and special and set apart.
So, yeah, exactly. Something that said what we're doing here isn't just a big meal, right? We're doing something different.
Usually that matters. Usually it's the where it gets off a little bit is when someone doesn't have the tie, and
Yeah.
then someone yells at somebody else, and like
Exactly.
big
It becomes-
drama.
Yeah, exactly.
It's nice if everyone's bought in,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. It is, and really, it only works, which is a part of why it's no longer. I mean, the things that were, if they're up to me, were very different than reality.
John's got a clip-on tie. He doesn't respect Christmas dinner.
So what's striking to me about this is I think that our experiences are all, I think, very similar to a lot of people's in that Christmas is about family. Right? Christmas is about family. And that's what I grew up kind of just experientially learning. Like Christmas was about family. It was about immediate family. It was about extended family. And I think that that's the general assumption in our broader culture, right? Like that's what, and when people have a hard time with Christmas, oftentimes they have a hard time because Christmas is about family, and either family isn't doing well, or they're separated from family, or it's no longer like it once was. But then you put into that context this whole concept of Advent, this whole concept of the celebration of the incarnation, and really a meditation on the incarnation. I think sometimes people have a hard time combining the two, right? It feels like these are two disparate focuses, and so they kind of it becomes about family, and they feel bad it's not about Jesus enough. And how have you guys navigated that in your families with your kids, and how have you emphasized the spiritual components, the Christian components of Christmas that maybe wasn't as much of an emphasis growing up, and how have you navigated that balance between Christmas being a family holiday versus essentially like a Christian meditation and celebration?
So one of the things about learning about the church calendar, one of the things it can do is make everything feel competitive. So that it's a zero-sum game. Like you're either going to make it about this or that. You're either going to make it about Jesus or family. And once you really get into the understanding of how Advent has been observed historically, which is not one thing. There's lots of different ways people have done this. Some people have tried to not do Advent. There are whole swaths of the Christian tradition that have like said no Christmas, because Christmas is sort of this other holiday.
Jose was talking about this, right? And the idolatry and the nativity scene, and I mean, there's all sorts of different ways.
All these things, right? Yeah. So like there's it's not one thing, and I think a negative way of handling that is just making it a competition, so you just feel guilty no matter what you do. Another negative way of handling
with
it,
that.
yeah, a lot of people do. Another negative way of doing it is making it just this kind of weird self-focused or your own family-focused buffet of spiritual things. And pick a bunch of things that make us feel warm and happy. But there's a way of looking at it that I think I've tried to do, which is look at all of the amazing Christ-focused ways that are available to any given person right now to highlight his goodness and mercy and grace in coming. There's so many different ways people have offered to us that allow us to take that on board during this season. So let me give just a couple of examples. A lot of people really struggle during the holidays because of things going on in their life, things going on in their family. There's a lot of the Advent season that was meant, the reason why people pushed Christmas back was because they wanted to give space to the bleak midwinter. They wanted to give space to the waiting and the idea that Christ entered into pain. And so there's a time of, Advent is a time not of feasting, but of fasting. It's a time of recognizing the short days and the darkness and the cold that Christ entered into. If you're going through something, Advent has something for you for that. And you don't need to go, oh man, I'm doing it wrong. But you know what? If you've had a great year and Advent becomes a time of taking the difficulties, moving away from the idea of, well, here the Advent candles are about the difficulties and the waiting and the bleakness and Christ entering into our suffering, and it becomes the peace candle and the shepherd candle, and the love candle, and that's a wonderful way of highlighting the beauty of Christ as well. And if you ever feel like, I think one of the things for us is we do still focus a lot on family. It's one of the few times in American culture that you have everyone going, yeah, it's time to hang out with our family. It's time to be with your loved ones. Why not look at that as a way of appreciating what Christ has given you and simultaneously look at the ways Christ makes up for your lack? Why not have Christ and family be something you can do together? So there's just a lot of ways that I think Christmas and Advent give you a lot of different ways to meet you where you are and highlight the goodness of the things you have and see those as coming from God, and also reckon with the things that you long for and see those as met in God. And all of those come together and culminate in the coming of Christ on Christmas Day for you and for us.
And I think for me, on a practical side, in the midst of the busyness, right? So you're talking family, and you're talking the potential for competition. But there's in this season, there's a million things that are competitive. It can be related to gift giving. That can be a competition. It can be related to other kinds of events, school events, or work events, or other kinds of things. Like, there's so much packed into the end of the year. Meeting with people that you want to see before the end of the year, or like relational connection, and you're trying to navigate all of that. It just feels like such a compacted, complicated time that I think what Brian is saying is powerful, because the season of Advent speaks into all of those areas and can speak hope and truth and transformation and power into all those areas. For us, the daily reading of an Advent devotional and singing of a song and lighting of a candle or a series of candles, like having a set apart time in our family for Advent, that continual structure is 100% necessary for us in this season. The structure, honestly, the structure itself, and I don't know if this is true for everybody. I would imagine it's true for more people than not. But the idea of let's make this a season about Jesus, and we're going to try to like just do that in casual or like non-structured ways, I think has severe limitations. I think this is why the idea of consistent devotionals or consistent structure to your devotional life, which is why we have the Advent package, is because there's so many things pulling at that time and attention, energy, and focus that you need something that anchors you. We just had a discussion a couple weeks ago on prayer in the night, and one of the things that came away from that in that book is the power of structure in things like prayer that we don't oftentimes think we need, but are so helpful in the midst of a life that pulls us in all these other directions. These kind of things can anchor us in a way, whether it's our kids or our family or us personally, anchor us in a way that non-structured things are really hard for them to do. So for us, it's that consistent every night reading of this devotional. It doesn't have to be a specific one. Like, there's so many good Advent devotionals, reading of a story from Scripture, thinking about truth, praying together, singing a song, even if it only takes 5 to 10 minutes. It is the kind of structure that is extremely necessary for us to have any kind of spiritual vitality in this season.
I think it's so helpful. And I think what resonates with me about it is that I think that structure is really helpful, particularly when it's not every night, right? Particularly when you miss a night, when things get busy, or you like things, you're like, oh man, we didn't do Advent tonight, but tomorrow, like, we still know what we're going to do, right? And so that even when it's, this is a friend of mine, because we were having this conversation with our kids just last night, where it's like, oh my gosh, we've fallen behind on Advent, like, oh, what did we do, and to be able to simply say, no, let's just do tonight, right? Like, we know what to do. Let's light the candle. Let's read a passage. We actually go through, we did this years ago. We had this little book, the Names of Jesus book.
Oh yeah.
Right. The tradition with our kids has become, I try to get them to guess what the name of Jesus is tonight. And so, what do you think? And unfortunately, I'm like, this is going to be really cool. It's going to be like a really spiritual thing. And so basically for like 17 days in a row, they all go, Prince of Peace. No? Okay. Well, next night, Prince of Peace.
Why Prince of Peace?
I don't know why. They're just waiting for Prince of Peace. They're like, because if I just keep saying the same one, if I say something different, this might be the day that it actually
It's like
is.
lotto numbers?
Yeah, it's like lotto. So if I just say it over and over and
Your
over,
kids are gambling
I'm
on
going
that.
to-
Playing the same
I'm gonna
number.
do you
get
think
it
they have
once.
do you think they have a side game going on? They have some bets going on when Prince of Peace comes up.
But
20-1 on Prince of Peace.
But anyways, I find this structure really helpful when it's every night because it like gives that rhythm and
If you miss,
when you miss and the grace that says, oh, like actually I know what to come back to.
and there's only a certain amount of nights left. You got 5 nights left.
Yep.
It's like it is what it is. Like this is tonight's night.
Yeah. And so, anyways, I think that's really, and I also resonate with just the helpfulness of that kind of structure in all of life. One of the things I love about that, both personally and with our family, is it takes sometimes a weekly rhythm, at the very least, a weekly rhythm of family worship, and imbues it into a nightly thing, which oftentimes has reverberations in other times of the year, oftentimes into January and things like that, where other types of conversation, like it shapes in different ways, both in expectation of it and coming out of it. It shapes other aspects of the year in a way that I think at their best seasons of the church calendar are meant to. But what about for each of you personally? What is most, maybe not most, but what is something that's significantly meaningful to you about the Advent season? Like what do you enjoy about it particularly?
I mean, I think it's hard to pin down exactly like, oh, it's this thing. Partially because there's so many layers of things going on.
It's part of why I don't want to ask most.
Right. Yeah.
Right? But
I mean, I think on the one hand, you have a unique season just culturally. Like you have this time when everything shifts. We're so disparate across kind of the United States, especially California. Like everyone's kind of got their own thing. Everyone's got their own playlist of songs. Everyone's got their own individual thing going on so much. The only thing that barely unites us is that kind of traffic picks up around the school year. You know, like Thanksgiving is one thing we kind of all do, but Christmas is this thing that everyone does for more than one night. You know, so you have like the lights and the decorations and the songs change. And there's something to me that's helpful about that I do enjoy a lot, which is, oh, here's an external thing that's focusing me on an event that I find a lot of spiritual significance in. So that's really rare. Normally you're fighting what's going on around you to try and go, oh, I want to make sure that I don't miss kind of the transcendent meaning of what's happening in the world, in my life, in my soul, in my heart right now. It's really nice in December because there's a bunch of stuff that's reminding you. It doesn't have to remind you if you don't believe it, but if you do believe it, you all of a sudden have this backwind. It's kind of helping you spiritually move forward into these things that I think sometimes can feel like it takes a fight to focus on. So I enjoy that part. That's a weird answer, but that's one.
You kind of alluded to it. And for me, honestly, I think if I was going to say one thing, and I know we're not saying just one thing, but for me, honestly, I think it's the music. Like, and there's you hear so much Christmas music everywhere, and like the regular normal stuff is you're probably sick of it. It might even be like hard to hear that I would say that music is the thing that's like, but there's so much weird, different, creative, old Christmas music. I was thinking about the choir this past Sunday. Like that is a completely different style than we would normally listen to, and so profound and beautiful as you like the words hit you differently. Like the meditation on the incarnation, in my mind, the meditation on the incarnation that comes from music. I was listening to we haven't done it this year, we've done it in years past, like Let All Mortal Flesh Keep Silence, right? Like this old, I mean, I think it's 1700 1800 year old originally a song about the incarnation, and just beautiful, haunting, weird, different. There's a great album, Bifrost Arts has a great album, Salvation is Created. Just weird, different. There's so much different. I would say if you're listening to music and you're like sick of it, like dig a little deeper, because there's some really fascinating, wonderful Christmas music out there. And for me, That's one of the most powerful ways that the theology of the incarnation gets like woven into my heart in this season. I don't know if that is true for anybody else, but
No, I think that's really rich. That's really rich.
when I hear Frosty the Snowman, I just like, man, like my heart just leaps for joy thinking about flesh.
I mean, he was,
God taking on flesh.
Imbued with power all of a sudden. So I think this is true every year, but maybe particularly this year. I know that there's a lot of pain and difficulty as well. I know there's a lot of just personal struggle and relationships and things like that. I think a lot of people are also just a bit overwhelmed by a world at war in a number of ways, a lot of just divisiveness and anger, and locally and then across the world, just horrific war. How does this season, how do you see this season not simply being a distraction in like, okay, let's just think about happy things, but how does it bring hope into the parts of life and people's lives that are particularly difficult right now?
I mean, that's where some semi-original idea of Advent is really helpful. Mm-hmm. I mean, I it strikes me just over this last, however long we've been talking, that I've been pretty theoretical, but I think I'm known for that.
You?
No.
But I think that's how I make sense of what's going on. Like, I think at some level, like I realize I can probably err on that side too, but that's how I make sense of the world around me, is going, what is it that actually explains this and doesn't reduce it? And I think that's the beauty of the incarnation in some ways, as this kind of central miracle of the Christian story, is that you have the light entering the darkness. You have Christ himself, not less than God, but fully God, not becoming less than human, but fully human. And if that's true, it has to intersect with the difficult, painful, horrible things that happen in the world, and not truncate them and not reduce them. And so I think that it sounds theoretical to talk about, yes, the bleak midwinter, very metaphorical and sort of, it's all imagery and story and ideas and abstract. But I think that's the only thing that actually allows you to stare the reality of the world in the face and not have to blink the entire time. Because if you don't do that, you're trying to cram reality into a smaller story and you're trying to make it not what it is. You're trying to take its power out of it. And you end up having to live a life saying, well, I'm not really dealing with it then. And you just kind of have to hide that. And I think if Christmas is true and real, that means that God didn't hide from the reality of sin and brokenness. And so neither do we. And in a weird way, that makes it harder to look at something, because you really have to square up to its reality. And my emotional side wants to run. Those emotions feel too big. I don't feel like I have the fortitude to meet the moment on some of the horrors of the world that we hear more about now than we've probably ever been able to hear about as human beings. To have video of things you only heard about before that, not that long ago you wouldn't have even heard about because it was across the world. To know the horrors of human experience in so many ways, and to set them right alongside all of the beauty and the brightness and the surprising joy of being a human being, and to have both of those up and running without going, well, I'm going to shrink them down to an easy Christmas song, or I'm going to shrink them down to an easy cynicism, or I'm going to shrink them down to be able to go, how do I actually deal with the realities of life and all of their fullness? Without blinking, I need, it's not theoretical in that sense. Like, I need to think big about those things if I'm going to be able to actually look at the reality of the size of them in the face. And that's the beauty of Christmas. The beauty of the incarnation is that that's what God did. Is he didn't stop short of the fullness of human life and experience. And if he didn't, and he was able to triumph and overcome those things through suffering, not apart from it, then so too can I look at things that are hard to look at when they're forced upon me, and reckon with the horrors of the world and the joys of the world, and live through them, knowing that the power of God is at work in this world, not some other world. So to me, that the theory really is an important way of living actual life. And Christmas is a great example to me of that in the midst of so many horrible things going on.
I mean, that's the power of Advent. Everything you just said right there is so much of a contrast with how the world typically sees Christmas. Christmas is a time of like joy and happiness and smiling through things. And the reality is there is a kind of superficial joy, superficial happiness that we can all give into in this season that prevents us from looking both ourselves and the world honestly in the face. And what the incarnation does, like exactly what you just said, it combines both the brokenness and darkness and hurt and suffering and failure of our own life and of the world around us, across the world or right next door, with real hope and real joy that is paired together. And the reality, maybe there's something about Christmas that does that more profoundly because of the incarnation, because it's God himself, hope, joy, peace, coming to our broken world, taking on our flesh, taking on our brokenness and entering into that himself. But the reality is any joy, any true joy you ever have at any point in the world is also simultaneously experienced with tons of suffering, both in your life and around you. And there's something so helpful and compelling about that when we are in a Christmas season where we give into that superficial kind of happiness and joy that's filled with, presents and sentimentality and all these other things. It never satisfies and never gives you the joy that it offers. And the truth is only Christmas really does that. It looks both the brokenness and the hope and the beauty in the face together and says both of these things are true because God became flesh.
Man, I love this time of year. I think it does it in all those ways. And so many more just reverberate in deep ways throughout our entire years. And it's why I think there's such a helpfulness and a richness to taking the time to consider it, to both prioritizing family and digging deep in investing in those relationships and utilizing the Advent season as a powerful reminder for these deep truths. I think that I appreciate what you said earlier, Brian, that I think sometimes we try to get them to compete as if one has to be the focus and the other one's not. But I think when we engage holy God, God directs and shows us his glory and power in unique ways through through the historical Advent focus and through the modern family focus of this really, really unique holiday. So,
well, can we say one more thing too?
Yeah, please.
I think because we do this a lot, and I do this all the time. So this is my besetting issue, one of many.
For another podcast.
We talked about the heights of joy and the depths of suffering, but the incarnation also means that Christ went squarely into the mundane parts of life too. And I think for most of us, I mean, some people listening to this are in the midst of really deep suffering. Some of you are in the midst of a really phenomenal celebration, and that's all true. A lot of people are going to be, Christmas is 4 days away. I think it's 4 or 5 days away. People are going to be scurrying. If there are kids involved in your life, cousins, your own nieces and nephews, whatever, you're going to be cleaning up wrapping paper. Mm-hmm. You're going to be doing all of these very normal things.
Packing.
Yeah, you're going to be under that stress that you feel guilty for experiencing because it doesn't feel real enough to really stress you out, but boy, does it. Mm-hmm. You're going to be traveling, packing, driving, flying, dealing with all the mundane things of life. And you're going to feel distracted. And Christ came into the very normal parts of human life too. He didn't just come to excesses. He came to the everyday. And that means that he can sympathize with you when your problems feel small and not huge. And it means that he can sympathize with you and celebrate with you when your celebrations feel medium-sized and not joyous and overwhelming. He can celebrate with you when you're picking up wrapping paper and when you're wrapping a gift and having a hard time, because wrapping gifts is very difficult. No one tells you this.
Bags.
It's very hard.
Bags.
It's all bags. But at the end of the day, your Christmas celebration doesn't need to be just over the moon worship in the depths of your soul or making it through the absolute horrors of the world. Worship also meets you right square where you are in a living room in an apartment. And that's good too. And so I guess I just want to emphasize for myself and for all of us how Advent and Christmas, it is in some sense by definition, Christ meeting you where you are. And from there producing worship and goodness and reality and depth in your life. And so don't think that because you will be distracted on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, that all of a sudden you have lost the meaning of Christmas. No, that's very much it. He came to us and spent a lot of time in obscurity and mundane work. And so when you're doing the small things and dealing with the small issues, he is as much there to be worshiped as any of the big things. Take full advantage, enjoy, let him be with you, because he came. That's what Christmas is he came to be with us. So let the Emmanuel be the Emmanuel in all the small things too over the next few days.
That's a great meditation to send us off on. Send us up to Christmas. So before we go, any songs to sing? I promise songs.
Frosty the Snowman. Doesn't just like speak to
Hits you
your soul.
deep. Deep. All right. Well, maybe
I could probably do Let All Mortal Flesh Keep Silence because it's
Maybe-
like all weird and creepy.
maybe we should really let people just click over at this point to their own Christmas playlist and enjoy that. So thanks for listening, all. We love you. We hope you have a Merry Christmas, and we'll see you Christmas Eve on Sunday.
Salvation spring up from the ground. Lord, rend the heavens and come down. Seek the lost and heal the lame. Jesus, bring glory to your name. Let all the prodigals run home. All of creation waits and groans. Lord, we've heard of your great fame. Father, cause all to shout your name.